midst of every opportunity, your speech must always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you ought to respond to every person. So, 3 questions that I kind of want to go over with you this morning. If you remember from the last time that I talked, I like to ask questions. I think questions are very provocative. They kind of force your Muslim friend to think about what's being said. They don't like to think critically about the Quran. So I want to ask these questions that's going to kind of put the ball in their court and force them to think a little bit. And those questions are: you say the Bible has been corrupted. I'm going to respond back with, well, what do you mean by corruption? A clarifying question. Secondly, why would you say the Bible's been corrupted? As we'll see here in a moment, this is not really something that is substantiated by the Quran. This is not something that the Quran really teaches. And then lastly, I want to show you some manuscript evidence. And my question there is, show me, where is the Bible corrupted?
Brother, when we connect the PowerPoint, it's interrupting the broadcast online. People are not able to hear. I'm sorry, we are not going to have PowerPoint. That's why you have to read everything you see.
Thank you. I appreciate you telling me that. All right. So, question number 1. What do you mean by corruption? That's our first question. So, there's at least 2 different ways that a text can be corrupted. A corruption of the meaning. We've all heard the question or the accusation that that's just your interpretation. We heard that last night with Anthony. If you watched the video, the Muslims, Abraham, he said, that's just your interpretation. So there's a corruption of the meaning, but this is not really talking about the actual manuscripts or the hard copy text that we have. So secondly, there's a corruption of the words or the manuscripts. And what our Muslim friends usually mean is that your Bible has suffered wholesale corruption that is totally unreliable. So this is not a matter of corruption of the meaning of the text. They are accusing us of having a corrupt Bible that we have today with us. And of course that means the manuscript evidence that we have, according to them, is not reliable. And again, hopefully you'll see at the end of this talk that that's not the case. Dr. Daniel Wallace says that we have an abundance of riches in the manuscript evidence that we have. You can be very confident that what you have in your Bibles today is exactly what was written down doctrinally in the early church. 99.9% doctrinally correct. We don't say that it's word for word perfect, but we do say that there's no doctrine that has been challenged in the manuscript evidence. Most of it is word variance, spelling variance. So Surah 279 is really their go-to verse. This is perhaps the most popular surah that they go to claim that the Quran teaches that our Bibles are corrupt. And it says, "Woe then unto those who write down with their own hands something which they claim to be divine writ, and then say, this is from God, in order to acquire a trifling gain thereby. Woe then unto them for what their hands have written, and woe unto them for all that they may have gained." So this is really their go-to surah when they think the Quran supports the idea of biblical corruption. But if we look at the context of this surah, go back to Surah 275, and it says that these were people who used to listen to the word of Allah and then changed it knowingly. So if they changed it knowingly, then obviously they had a reliable text somewhere to go by, to know what was said in God's word. So this doesn't support the idea of textual corruption. And then 277 says Allah knows what they keep hidden and what they proclaim. So again, here's this idea that they're hiding the genuine text. And then 278 says there are among them illiterate people who do not know the book except from hearsay. So again, there's really nothing here contextually to support the idea that the manuscripts that they had at that time were corrupted. And of course, we know, if you've ever looked at the manuscript evidence, we know that there's an abundance of riches. Again, we have entire Bibles that predate Muhammad. We have thousands of manuscripts that confirm what we have today in our Bibles. And again, we'll look at that a little more closely here in a moment. But the biography of Muhammad supports this idea, too, that it's not a textual corruption, but it's an interpretation of meaning. Looks like 252, if you have a copy of Alfred Guillaume's biography of Muhammad, page 252 has Surah 277 through 78, and then it also has Surah 280 there as well. And I just want to I'll read just a little part of it here. It says, God said, do they not know that God knows what they conceal and what they proclaim? And some of them are Gentiles who do not know the book but merely recite passages. They only think they know. They don't know the book and they don't know what is in it, yet they oppose thy prophethood on mere opinion. I believe that we can very much substantiate that according to the Qur'an and according to other Islamic literature, that we can put a timestamp on when Muslims think the Bible was corrupted, and that was after the Jews recognized that Muhammad was not a prophet, and so they rejected the Qur'an, and therefore they rejected Muhammad. And so the response from the Muslims is, well, you are corrupting your book. You don't really understand what it says, I think, is what they're saying there. It's an interesting side note that Yusuf Ali refers to those in 277 as illiterate people, but in the biography of Muhammad here is the Gentiles. But again, my point is if they do not know the book or they do not know what is in it, and the implication is that some people did know what was in the book, and again, there's nothing here to indicate textual corruption. All right, so the second question, why would you claim the Bible has been corrupted? You can look at Surah 3:3. Surah 3:3 says, it is he who sent down to thee step by step in truth the book, confirming what went before it, and he sent down the law of Moses and the gospel of Jesus before this as a guide to mankind. He sent down the criterion of judgment between right and wrong. Now, I don't want to stand up here today and pretend like I'm some Arabic expert, because I'm not, but I have practiced very hard to say what is being said right here. And the Quran is literally confirming that what the Jews had at this time, the Jews and the Christians, was literally what was between their hands. Lima baina yadehi. What was between their hands. This is an Arabic idiom. What was contemporary, I'm losing my voice, sorry. What was contemporary to this time. So if they're going to say that our Bible is corrupted, then we can go to this passage right here and say, well, how do you handle this? Your Quran doesn't support this idea. We could also go to Surah 6:115. It says, the word of thy Lord doth find its fulfillment in truth and in justice. None can change his words, for he is the one who heareth and knoweth all. So no one can change Allah's word, according to the Quran. You're saying that my Bible's been corrupted, but your Quran says that no one can change the word of Allah. How does that work? Now, some of them like to respond by saying this is, Surah 2:185 here. I'll just go ahead and read it first before I comment on it. But Ramadan is the month in which it was sent down, the Quran, as a guide to mankind, as clear signs for guidance and judgment between right and wrong. So some Muslims like to say that when the Quran is like the Torah and the Gospel, it was sent down, but when Allah speaks of the fact that no one can change His word, He's really talking about the Quran. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's anything that's, again, supported in the Quran. If you look at Surah 2:185 and you compare it to the other Surah, Surah 3:3, we see that it uses very much the same language, right? So it was sent down. So the Torah and the Gospel and the Quran were sent down. Same language here. It also says they are a guide for mankind. So this seems to be universal. You know, it's not something temporary. It's a universal guide for mankind. And the Quran also tells us that it was used to judge between right and wrong. So their argument just really doesn't work here. Ibn Abbas, he says the word tarif or corruption signifies to change a thing from its original nature, and that there is no man who could corrupt a single word of what proceeded from God. So that the Jews and Christians could corrupt only by misrepresenting the meaning of the words of God. So I want to pressure them on this point. You're saying my Bible has been corrupted textually. You're saying that my manuscripts that I have in support of my Bible today is not trustworthy, but your Quran seems to be talking about interpretation, not textual corruption. All right, lastly, I want to pressure them to show me where is the Bible corrupted. Surah 5:47 says, "Let the people of the gospel judge by what God hath revealed therein. If any do fail to judge by the light of what God hath revealed, they are no better than those who rebel." So the background of this text is a group of Jews come to Muhammad to settle an argument, and Allah responds in 5:43 by saying, "Why are the Jews coming to you when they have the Torah?" And so again, by way of background, they have a judgment seat at this time that Muhammad comes along and he sits on this judgment seat to settle this dispute. And he tells the Jews to bring the Torah to him, and Muhammad gets up off of this judgment seat and he places the Torah in his place. And he's basically saying, again, judge, you are to judge by the Torah, not by me. Again, the point being, Muhammad is not the judge, but the Torah is the way that they judge. And just a few verses later, we find the same thing said about the gospel to the Christians. All right, so just a little bit of manuscript evidence. I know that you can't see the PowerPoint, but I want to give you just a great resource, okay? How many of you have heard of Dr. Daniel Wallace? Okay, well, most of you are already aware of this. If you go to the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, you can find actual manuscripts, papyrus manuscripts that we have today.
David.
Daniel Wallace and his team are working very diligently to preserve these manuscripts digitally, and you can find them online. You can look at them. You can go back to the 2nd century and look at the John Ryland fragment. I have on my bookshelf back home, I have a copy of what's called the John Ryland fragment. It's John 18. And if you look at this fragment about the size of a credit card, you can see that John 18 on this fragment is just like what you have in your Bible today in John 18. Another very interesting fact about this fragment is that it has writing on the front and the back. So Christians, if you don't know this, were one of the first to implement a book instead of a scroll. This early 2nd century fragment was in book form. And it's John 18, 31 through 33, and then on the back I think it has John 18, 36 through 38. So we also have early manuscripts, 25 to 150 years after the original New Testament writings, compared to an average of 1,000-year average for other ancient books, other books from antiquity. Also, I was really hoping that you'd be able to see this PowerPoint, so I'm just trying to figure out the best way to communicate this. But I don't know if you're aware of, there was obviously this transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament, right? So there's this period where they don't have, the early church doesn't have the New Testament. And this is very much an oral culture. And so your New Testament is filled with what's known as early oral creeds, these doctrinal statements that are very much in a way that you can memorize them. They're easy to remember, but they're just packed with doctrine. They're just packed with the deity of Christ, the Trinity. And if you look at Philippians 2, this is one. There's a certain portion of Philippians 2 that is known as the Carmen Christi. It's an early hymn to Christ. And scholars date this really, really early. Gerd Ludemann, by the way, anybody know who Gerd Ludemann is? He's a New Testament professor who is an atheist. So you could, what I'm about to tell you is confirmed not only by Christian scholars, but atheist and agnostic scholars as well. The evidence is so overwhelming that even atheist and agnostic professors have to admit these things. And here's what Gerd Ludemann says. He says, the elements in this tradition, and he's talking about another creed that's found in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, which if you're aware of this passage, it's about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He says the elements in the tradition are to be dated to the first 2 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, no later than 3 years. The formation of the tradition is mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, falls into the time of between 30 CE and 33 CE. Now that might not mean much to you, but let me tell you folks, that's awesome. That's within 3 years of the cross. That's what Gerd Ludemann, an atheist, is saying. So our Muslim friends want to come along 600 plus years later and tell us something differently. And that's their dating. That's according to the standard Islamic narrative. I don't think it's that early. I think it's much, much, much later. I think those will tell you the same thing. John Dominic Crossan, he's another very liberal professor. I would not I would say he's not a Christian. I think he would admit that. He says Paul wrote to the Corinthians from Ephesus in the early 50s CE, but he says in 1 Corinthians 15:3 that I have handed on to you as of first importance, which I in turn received. So this didn't originate with Paul. The most likely source and time for his reception of that tradition would have been Jerusalem in the early 30s, when according to Galatians 1:18, he went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, or Peter, and stayed with him 15 days. Now, wouldn't you like to stay with Peter for 15 days? Not this Peter.
Not me.
I would like to stay with him 15 days as well, but
You don't let him much.
but think about this. Muslims want to say that they want to attack Paul. But here we have, if you go to Galatians 1 and 2, you have Paul with Peter, James, John. You have 4 of the most influential men in the New Testament. And by the way, those were eyewitnesses, were they not? So these were, James was was transformed at one time. The Bible says that the family of Jesus thought he was crazy. They thought he was out of his mind. And then suddenly James is changed. He becomes the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He's transformed by the fact that his brother died on the cross, was resurrected from the dead, and appeared to him. Now, I know that would be a tough pill for some of us to swallow, the fact that our brother was actually God in human flesh. But we see this transformation of James. Again, I have a picture here of Galatians 1, 10 through 22 from the early 2nd, 3rd century. You can go to the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts and just type in your passage, and it'll pull you up a manuscript. And you can look at it. This is a copy of Galatians 1 from the 2nd to 3rd century. It's pretty amazing, don't you think? All right, so I'll close with this. I've talked a little bit about clarifying questions. I think we should also learn to ask thought-provoking questions. We really need to think strategically about what we're saying to our Muslim friends. Think beforehand what we're going to say. And Paul Mashri, he's the founder of Crescent Project, and he has a great little book called Sharing Jesus with Muslims. It's packed with these type of questions. He has this ability to ask a very thought-provoking questions, and I'll just close with this one. He says, if all the Christians got together, this is a question, by the way, for you to ask your Muslim friends. If all the Christians got together and tried to change the Injil, who would win, God or the Christians? Puts the ball back in their court, makes them think about what they're saying, and I think we can demonstrate very clearly that the Word of God has not been corrupted, that what you and I have today in our Bibles is very much what the early church had. We can be confident of that. So don't be timid when you're faced with this accusation of biblical corruption. Okay? All right, bless you folks. Enjoy the rest of the talk.
Anthony, you're next. What topic you to speak about, brother?
Well, you were going to tell me. No. I am following up on yesterday. So, throughout the conference, I've already spoken 3 times, and all of the topics are related to each other. I know that not everyone was present for all those talks, but I first talked about the doctrine of the Trinity, the importance of knowing it, first of all, for our own benefit, and also in order to communicate it and defend it in the face of Muslim attacks. And then I followed that by talking about Tawheed, the Islamic doctrine of God. So first, positively, our position, then negatively, the Islamic position. After that, I spoke about the Incarnation, the importance of knowing it, and how to defend it against Islamic attacks. Now what I'm going to do is, once again, turn the focus of attention to the Islamic teaching, and I always happen to be speaking when my food arrives. I'm just marveling over the providence here.
Want to break while you eat?
So, I got to pull this out. So now what I want to do is turn the tables, as it were. Muslims object to the Incarnation. Do they have good grounds to do so? We've already seen they don't, not in principle. They don't have any grounds to do so biblically. They don't have any grounds to do so in terms of God's actual revelation. But they also don't have any grounds to do so when we looked at what they claim to be a revelation from God. Now, before getting into that, I want to bring up another issue that I haven't talked about that Muslims like to bring up and is a point of attack. The very gospel, or scriptures, not just the gospel, but the scriptures within which we have the account of the Incarnation, both its anticipation in the Old Testament and its fulfillment in the New, those are usually attacked by Muslims. One of the things that they do to attack them is they suggest that there is, and more than suggest, they assert and try and forcefully drive the point that these texts are not consistent with each other. And specifically, they will often focus on the gospel accounts. And I know you've all encountered this, maybe even in your own reading, you've wondered, what is the relationship of this gospel to the other one, and the way it words or reports something to another account, and you perhaps wondered how these things go together. Well, Muslims bring these sorts of things up in order to challenge the very accounts that we have of the Incarnation. So they object to the Incarnation, they also object to the accounts that reported. That's why Olin is talking about the preservation of the text. We believe that the text has been preserved. It has been handed down to us accurately. We may have in the manuscript tradition textual variation, but because we have such a proliferation of manuscripts, we are able to compare and collate them and know what was originally written. We are able to ferret out those sorts of things that are represented in some manuscripts and say, oh, this is an isolated reading, for example. It's not representative of what we find in the wider manuscript tradition, and so this isn't representative of the original reading. Well, this sort of objection, though, that I'm thinking of here is different. This objection is, if you look at the accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you sometimes have the same incident reported with some verbal variation, right? In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you'll often have the same story. Sometimes it's found in all three of the synoptics, sometimes only in two of them. But sometimes you'll even have all four accounts containing the same incident. So, for example, the sea walking pericope is also found in Mark's Gospel and Matthew's Gospel and John's Gospel. So there you have an example of two of the Gospels including it and John. John usually focuses on different things. John's usually focused on things that are happening in Jerusalem, on various feast days and so forth. So I think you all kind of have an idea of what I mean here. If you look at the resurrection accounts, sometimes you'll notice in one gospel it'll mention one person, in another gospel it'll mention two. The Gadarene demoniac, in one gospel it mentions one man who was demon possessed, in another gospel it mentions two. Now, these are not contradictions. You have to watch the sleight of hand. It's not a contradiction for somebody to say in one place that a person was there, and then in another place mention that there was also another person. If it's not relevant to the point that's being made here, then it doesn't have to be mentioned. If I tell you guys a story about going to the movie and my son reacted to this one scene, it was somehow very impactful for him, well, I told you something for a reason. If I later tell you, oh, my daughter, she really liked this part, you might say, but inappropriately, oh, you contradicted yourself. At one point you said it was with your son, now you're saying your daughter was there. That's not a contradiction, that's just additional detail. Okay, that's the sort of thing that people often bring up and object to in the Bible. So keep that in mind. Well, what is it that Muslims have said against the Incarnation? We looked at some of this and addressed it before. They say, for example, that God cannot condescend and enter into his creation. We saw that's foolish. What kind of owner of a house or a construction worker would build a property and not build it in such a way that he has access to it? Right? Imagine building a home with no windows or doors. We'd think such a person was foolish. He was on a fool's errand. Well, according to Muslims, Allah was on a fool's errand when he made the world. He made a world that he was excluded from. Or maybe he's like me and he constantly loses his keys or forgets. I mean, I don't lose my keys, I just completely forget them. I know right where they are, and where I can't get them, locked inside my house. Right? Is Allah like that? Well, that's problematic. I also pointed out that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say Allah can't enter into the world and communicate directly with his creatures when you're then going to turn around and claim that's exactly what the Quran is, a revelation of Allah. Well, how did Muhammad get this revelation? Muslims will say, well, he got it from Gabriel, who got it from Allah. But how did Gabriel get it? Gabriel's a creature. He might be greater than Muhammad, but he's not greater than creation. And if Allah can't enter creation, it's no solution to the problem. How did the word get to Muhammad to say, well, because it got to Gabriel? How did it get to Gabriel? There's all sorts of problems. But here's a huge problem. Muhammad wanted to claim that his teachings were continuous with previous revelation. He's the last and greatest of the prophets. He did not claim, as you heard from Olin, he did not claim that the Bible's been corrupted. He thought the Bible was true. He thought that he was a purveyor of the same message. He didn't know any better. He heard stories from Jews and Christians and just thought he was picking up from where they left off and couldn't check these things against the Bible. So there were all sorts of things that he was conveying without a whole lot of precision. He didn't have precise biblical knowledge. He had oral recordings of it, and he couldn't tell the difference. He couldn't tell the difference between, say, when a Jewish person was reciting the Torah or the Psalms, or when a Christian was reciting the Gospel, and when they were reciting, say, some oral teaching, some midrash in the case of Jews, something from the Talmud. And I can tell you, I constantly, because I continually read through Jewish writings, and I come across something new almost every day, and I think, wait a minute, this is where it came from in the Quran. I didn't know that. I mean, I know of plenty, believe me. There's all sorts of books out there written on these topics, pointing out this source, that source, and the other thing. And I still find new ones every day. Well, what that means is that Muhammad, hearing these things, he's believing that his message is continuous with all that. He'll often incorporate things into the Quran and into his hadith narrations that may not be consistent with the logic of his overall message, but at that stage in the game, he doesn't necessarily realize that. It's often the case that the original founder of a movement will say all sorts of things. He draws people to himself because of various factors, his charisma and other things, and then it's left to people after them to kind of systematize it. And what a job Muhammad left them with. Muslims fall all over themselves trying to systematize his teaching. So let me give you an example of something that I have in mind here. The reason I've chosen this example is because we have 4 different accounts of it in the Quran. Almost like a version according to, right, Matthew, according to Mark, according to Luke, according to John. We have 4 accounts in the Quran of this event. The event is God speaking to Moses, right? Now, others who have read the Quran are already anticipating where I'm going with this. You know that in the story of Moses, according to the Bible, God spoke to Moses from the burning bush. That story is a count that's at the foundation of Jewish belief. This was the initiatory moment. This is when Moses comes to learn about God, at least experientially. He comes to know God in this moment, and this is what sets everything in motion for the Exodus. God is coming to Moses, and he speaks to him. He calls him as a prophet and sends him to Pharaoh and to the Israelites. And so this is an important text in the Bible, but it's also a text that establishes, contra Islam, that God is able to enter into the world and he's able to communicate with his creatures. Now, we don't believe that God becomes limited by this. We don't believe that God is now confined or restrained by this just because he's speaking to Moses, but he very much is present to Moses. Moses hears God speaking to him from the bush, and there's a visible display of God's presence. The fact that the bush was on fire but not being consumed. So here is just a portion of one of these accounts, and unfortunately I can't put it on the screen to show you these. It'd be much easier if you could see all of this, but here's an interesting version of this account. It says, "Has the story of Moses reached thee?" Now you have to know that when the Quran is addressing someone, it's often Muhammad. Oh no, I can't do it.
Oh, is it that?
Oh,
Sorry.
It says, "Has the story of Moses reached thee?" Here it's singular. It's talking to a specific individual. It means that Allah is addressing Muhammad, and he's saying, "Has this story reached you?" Okay. Now, Muhammad lives around Jews. You can be sure the story reached him. That's really how he knows about it. That's how he's bringing it up in the Quran. But it's even worse. This surah, where Allah is asking Muhammad, "Has the story of Moses reached you?" and he's about to tell him the story and for him to recite it. According to the chronology of the revelation of the Quran, I told you there's 4 accounts. This story is not the first time the story of Moses appears in the Quran. It's not the first time that Muhammad gives some account of Moses encountering God at the burning bush. Why is Allah asking Moses if he's heard this story before? Does Allah not know that he already told him the story? Allah already told the story to Muhammad. "Has the story of Moses reached thee?" Okay. In Surah 19 it says, also, this is Allah, also mentioned in the book the story of Moses, where he was specially chosen. Here's Surah 27. "Behold, Moses said to his family," and it goes on to tell the account. Surah 28, "Now when Moses had fulfilled the term and was traveling with his family," and it goes on to recount it. So the story is given 4 times, and the account in Surah 20 is not the first one. There are other occasions prior to this one. Looks like we might be able to put this on the screen. Let's see. Whoops, it disappeared from my screen.
It will be fine now.
Oh, there it is. Oops. Hey. All right. Well, I'll move on, and if it pops up, you guys can react.
I am sorry.
No, it's
Oh, okay. It's gonna open now.
Okay, so there are 4 accounts. Allah doesn't know that he's already given one to Muhammad. Okay, so both of them apparently forgot, because Muhammad should have said, "Hey, wait a minute, Allah, you forgot Surah 19." Right? There's a huge problem here. If you believe that your Quran was preserved, especially through oral memorization, I mean, they're memorizing it and transmitting it. Here's Allah and his prophet both forgetting that they've already done this before, right? If they're forgetting, believe me, the rest of the Muslims are making some mistakes along the way too. All right, well, let's let that slide for a moment. But the fact is we have 4 accounts. They're not all the same. You look at the accounts, they're not the same. Here's something that Allah says in Surah 20, or he's recounting it. This is Moses. He sees the fire. He says to his family, "Tarry ye, I perceive a fire." So he wants his family to wait. He's going to go over there and check it out. He wants to know what's happening over here at this fire. Well, here's what it says in Surah 27. He says, "I perceive a fire. Soon I'll bring you from there some information, or I'll bring you a burning brand to light our fuel," and so forth. So he's saying, I see a fire. I'm going to go over there and either find some information out, because if there's a fire, there's probably people there, or I'm going to bring back fire and we'll warm ourselves and so forth. But did you notice he didn't use the word "tarry ye"? He didn't tell them to wait. Now, I don't think that's a huge problem, this particular issue. But remember their objection. Their objection is, if you have verbal variation, then it necessarily means there's something wrong with the accounts that give it to you. All the difference here amounts to is you're just not given those particular words. Okay? It says, "Tarry ye, I'm going to go over for this reason." The next account says, "I'm going to go over there for this reason." It doesn't say "tarry ye." That's not a problem. It's just you're not given all the information in one account. I'm not saying that the other thing I mentioned isn't a problem. Allah should have remembered that he told the story before. That's a huge problem. But here, as you go on through the story, there are variations that amount to not just variations, but to altogether different versions. One of my favorite things to notice, remember I said that Allah doesn't appear to remember that he told this story before, and Muhammad doesn't remember that he didn't tell it either, or that he told it as well. Listen to what happens in the account when Allah is speaking to Moses. At one point, Allah says to Moses, "What is that in thy right hand, O Moses?" And then Moses says, "It is my rod. On it I lean. With it I beat down fodder for my flocks, and in it I find other uses." Now, the irony of this to me is, now remember, this is the Allah who didn't remember that he already told this story before. He's asking Moses. Ordinarily, I would just think this is a rhetorical question. Allah is asking Moses because he wants Moses to respond. But in light of the fact that Allah doesn't seem to remember everything, I'm now wondering if this is a serious query. But the way Moses responds reinforces that. Moses doesn't just say, "It's my rod, why are you asking?" He says, "It is my rod, and listen to all the purposes that it has, Allah. Listen, this rod, I use it to lean on. I use it to beat down fodder for my flocks, and I have other uses for it. If you have some time, I can tell you all about it," right? This just seems to me like the being described here is not altogether wise. Now, by the way, if you look at the other accounts that have other verbal variations call Allah wise. This version doesn't. This version doesn't call him wise, and I think it makes sense. Because in this version, Allah doesn't remember that he told the story before. And he's been telling it differently, and he's asking Moses questions. This version of Allah is not the same as the other versions of Allah. What I'm doing here is the same game that Muslims play, although I think there's a bit more teeth to it. Okay, they will point to the Gospels and say there's differences in the account, and they will also say some of the accounts seem to give us a higher view of Jesus than other versions. Some versions make him seem more powerful, more divine, and so forth. Now, I think those attempts to attack the Bible are not sound, but that's what they do. But notice how easily I can do that here with their own account. And I can keep this sort of thing up. But what's the real issue? I'm attacking this here, the whole issue of attacking our Bible in this way and so forth. But the real reason I brought this all up was because of the claim that God can't enter into his creation. What is Allah doing in these accounts? How is it that he's talking directly to Moses? If God can appear to Moses in a burning bush, then what is the grounds for objecting to the Incarnation? What is the grounds of objecting to the Incarnation on the alleged basis that Jesus said nobody knows the day or the hour, not the angels in heaven, right? Nor the Son, but the Father only. Now, Muslims, as they understand this, and unfortunately as some Christians understand this, allegedly Jesus is claiming ignorance of the final day. Now, I interpret that differently, and I'll explain that in a second. But remember, this is their claim. Because the incarnate Son says he doesn't know the day or the hour, this is supposed to prove that he is not the incarnate Son of God. Well, here's Allah appearing within a bush and apparently doesn't know what a rod does. He needs to be told by Moses. Well, Jesus doesn't know the day or the hour, but I can assure you he knows what a rod is for, right? Allah's not even smart enough to know what a rod is for, apparently, according to the Qur'an. But my interpretation of Matthew 24 and the synoptic parallels to that is actually different. If you look, I actually did this with Hatun once in the past on her show. We were talking about that statement in Matthew 24. In Hebrew, the word, well, not just Hebrew, but there's a particular construction that makes this all the more a idiomatic thing in Hebrew. But the word "know" in the Bible is used in various ways. In Genesis 4, it says Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore a son. I assure you that doesn't mean Adam became aware that there's this other person named Eve. Okay? It's a idiomatic way of explaining an intimacy that they had. And of course, everybody knows what I mean. In Amos, God said, "You only have I known among all the families of the earth." God is not saying he doesn't know that there were Amalekites and Edomites and so forth. He's saying that only they were the objects, the special objects of his love and care. He covenanted with them. In Matthew 7, Jesus will say to certain people on the final day, "I never knew you." He doesn't mean that somebody's going to get there and he's going to say, "Where did you come from? And what is that thing in your hand?" "Oh, it's a rod. With it I beat That's not what Jesus is saying. When he says, I never knew you, he's saying we had no relationship. There's a sense in which you can use the word know that doesn't refer to cognitive information. Now, here's another use similar to this. In 1 Corinthians 2, Paul said, I resolve to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified. Was Paul saying, I resolve to not know who my mother is and know that I studied at the feet of Gamaliel and all the rest? I resolve not to know Greek, the language I'm writing to you in? No, he's saying, if we want to express this in our idiom, we would say, I determined to make known nothing to you except Christ and him crucified. This is fundamentally what will address your problem. You guys have all these problems. What will address that is the cross of Christ. And that's what he does throughout the epistle. He applies the cross of Christ to the problems that are afoot in Corinth. As I said, there's an idiom in Hebrew that indicates this, and I won't get into the technicalities of that. But it's causative. It means to make known. What Jesus is doing in Matthew 24 is he's saying that it's not his prerogative to make that day known. That's the Father's prerogative. As the Son, he's come into the world to serve the Father and to fulfill his will, and involved in that is not making the day known. Now, interestingly, what he's talking about in the context is the day of his coming for his bride. Right? If you look at the parables that follow this, you look at the parables, he talks about the virgins, the foolish virgins and wise virgins, and so forth. They're going out to what? For the bridegroom. In first century Israel, a man would be betrothed to a woman, and it was the prerogative of the father to declare the day when he would go and get his bride. That was his special privilege. And so it's just Jewish culture and Jewish idiom that's at play here. Jesus was not the one who would make that day known. It was the prerogative of the Father. But in any case, the Muslims object to the Incarnation on the grounds that God can't enter into creation. But here we have an Old Testament example of God entering into creation. This is very easy to use. Now, some Muslims will try and object here and say, no. That's not really Allah there. He's not really there. Somehow he's projecting his voice or something like that. The claim of Muslims is that Allah was not really there. Maybe it was an angel or something like that. Well, there are all sorts of problems with this. But remember what I said, how a person sometimes delivers a message. He's very charismatic. People are drawn to him. And then it's left to people later to try and systematize this. And they have all sorts of problems. Well, there are certain Muslim schools of thought that will say it's not really Allah who's there speaking and so forth. They have serious problems with this. Others will say it is Allah and try and account for how this could happen without Allah actually being there. There's all these different ways that Muslims try to deal with it. But listen to what it says in Surah 27, verse 7 and 8. It says, but when he, Moses, came to the fire, a voice was heard, O Moses, verily I am thy Lord. So it's not an angel. And then it says, therefore, in my presence, put off your shoes. So Moses has to put off his shoes. Why? Because he's in the presence of who? Allah. Allah's not, I want to say ventriloquist, but a ventriloquist is not casting his voice. That would be impressive, right? One thing to have a puppet right here and make it look like it's talking, but to actually project your voice and make it sound like it's coming from the other side of the room. Now, actually, some Muslims have said things like, well, you could do that, right, with microphones. Like, we could do that, so maybe Allah could do that, project his voice. But here it's saying that the very grounds that Moses is standing on is such that Moses has to take off his shoes because Allah is present. He's sanctifying the ground. And then he says to Moses, thou art in the sacred valley of Tuwa. I have chosen thee, listen then to inspiration. Verily I am God, there's no other, and so forth. The other accounts bear this out as well. Like I said, there's 4 accounts. Go and compare them as you're able. Here is a very easy account to use. I should give you guys the verses on this, by the way. So, Surah 19, verses 50 through 53. Notice 50 through 53, that's 4 verses, right? Then there's Surah 20, verse 9 through 36. Quite a number of verses, right? We went from 4 to, 27, 28. So Surah 20, verses 9 through 36. Then Surah 27, verses 7 through 14. And then Surah 28, verses 29 through 31. So apparently sometimes Allah can be very brief. Sometimes he's quite wordy. Now there are other things, and I won't spend much more time here. I'm assuming I'm towards the end. But I just gave you one very easy example. This is one that you have a lot to work with. You have 4 separate attempts to address this in the Quran. So it's not in the Hadiths. Anytime I can find something in the Quran to use, I do, because it's more accessible. It's more easy to use in your conversation with Muslims because you can pull up the Quran. The Hadith are a lot more unwieldy. You're talking, 9 volumes of Sahih Bukhari. You're not toting those around with you typically. So if I can find it in the Quran, I like to use that. But there are all sorts of things, not only in the Quran, but also in the Hadith. For example, what happens every last third of the night? Does anybody know?
Allah goes down to the third heaven and hear everybody's prayer.
Yes. So it's especially important to pray at that time because Allah has come near. He's come down into the last heaven, the lower heaven, at the last. What's Allah doing? Entering into creation, right? I think Elle might have had something to say.
I was gonna say it's not even that he hears it. Then he literally has to ask, "Did anyone pray?" Like he doesn't even know.
Yeah. And so
It's okay to have hearing problems.
yeah, so it was mentioned for those that are listening through the online. It was mentioned that he asked if people had prayed. So you'll find now that you're alerted to this, you'll notice all sorts of other examples. But I'll be content to leave it with that, unless there are any questions. Actually, maybe there are questions.
You have some time left if you want.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm used to not having enough time. Yes, sir.
What's a surah?
What is a surah? A surah is a chapter of the Quran. You sounded like Allah for a moment there, though. What's that in your hand? I can only imagine what Allah's going through today. We got cell phones and everything else. What's that in your hand? It's a contraption. With it, I make calls. And with it, I have apps.
What are the responses that you get whenever you bring up that the stories from the Quran are often brought from previous, especially Jewish writings?
Well, so ironically, you're all going to find this humorous now, after what I've just said. They will sometimes say, the version of these accounts that you get in the Quran have now cleaned up the problems that are apparent in the biblical accounts of these things. So as an example, I've debated a Muslim once who said the account of God in Genesis 18 and 19, where God comes down, appears to Abraham, and then destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, God appears very anthropomorphic. And, that was not a problem. In his mind, that was a problem. For us, we believe that's a description of what God is able to do, not because he is limited, confined to a body, but because he's the eternal God, right? So he has that ability. He can condescend and speak with his creatures. Beautiful account. When the author of Hebrews says to make sure that you're hospitable to strangers, and it says because some people have entertained angels unawares, that's an understatement, right? Some people have entertained God unawares, right? But he's being very subdued there when he says that. Well, so the guy objects. He says in the Quranic version of all this, Allah doesn't appear and that sort of thing. Well, that's not a proof, first of all, that the Quranic accounts have now cleaned up something that's problematic. It's just done the very thing that the Old Testament is given to lead us to Christ. Now that they have done away with the accounts of that sort of thing, they don't have the background context within which the Incarnation makes perfect sense. Remember when Jesus said in John 8, he talks like Abraham was somebody that he knew intimately. So much so, long before the Jews say in John 8, you're only 50 years old and you've seen Abraham. Jesus was talking all along the way as if he knew Abraham. Read the account; it's profound. There's one point in the way back in John 8, Jesus said, "If Abraham were your father, you wouldn't be doing this." He said, He said, if Abraham were your father, you wouldn't be trying to kill me. Abraham didn't do this. We often read that and think, well, he's just saying Abraham didn't try to kill people. That's not what he said. He says, your father Abraham, if Abraham were your father, you wouldn't be trying to kill me. Abraham did not do this. What's this? Tried to kill me. Well, how would you have had an opportunity to try to kill him? Right? So when he later says, before Abraham became I am, and then in that same context, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, he doesn't say he will see it or he's now seeing it. He says he saw it. He's referring to some day in the past. So what day was that? Well, there's a whole thing I'd love to tell. Probably don't have enough time for that, but I will say this. How much time do I have, actually?
Almost 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, that's good.
Wow.
So,
Doesn't begin.
Genesis 18. Genesis 18. This is a phenomenal theophany. So, I mean, it's phenomenal to me because it's so mundane. Other theophanies sort of make sense to us, right? Ezekiel 1, look at the theophany there. There's this glorious image. Ezekiel seems like he's not even willing to come right out and say exactly what he saw. He's so, he says, I saw the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. He doesn't want to give you the details because he thinks he's inadequate to the task. So this one is like God is appearing with two men, and Abraham doesn't at first even appear to know who he's talking to. It becomes apparent to him. So God appears in this very mundane way, and in the story that leading up to this, you remember God has promised him a son. Abraham desires a son. He needs an heir. So much is this problematic in the way things are working out that he goes on to Hagar at Sarah's behest. That creates all sorts of problems. And then God tells him, no, this isn't the son I'm talking about. It's going to be through Sarah and so forth. Well, God's promising him that. It's not coming to fruition. That's why the whole Hagar thing came about. And the years continue to roll on. Well, God appears in Genesis 18. Sarah's in the tent. God is speaking with Abraham. And he tells Abraham why he's come. And he says, I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Okay, so here's the question I like to ask. And if you've heard me ask this before, don't answer. What do you think Abraham would have been looking forward to next year?
Him reappearing?
See, I said those who've heard me talk to this before. Yeah, you have. Okay. Jody had no. But that's the truth. That's the truth. He did say he's going to have a son, right? But we easily miss that he says, I will appear to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. The birth of Isaac would coincide with the return of God. Now, what did Sarah do when this promise was made by God? What did she do in the tent? She laughed, right? When Isaac is born, now, they name him Isaac, which means laughter. But now it's not a response of incredulity. It's now one of joy, right? So on this occasion, they're rejoicing, right? What did Jesus say in John 8? Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Abraham's not portrayed as doubting in the account. It's Sarah at this point. Not that Abraham never doubted, but at this point it's Sarah. And they both, of course, would have been rejoicing at the moment. So what I hold is that the event that Jesus is referring to in the past is this event. This is the time when Jesus came back to him. Now, by the way, I'll just give you one more little tidbit. God appeared to Abraham in Genesis 18, and then he had a second purpose for coming, not only to speak to Abraham about the coming of Isaac, but also to go down to Sodom and Gomorrah and destroy it. That's why Abraham stays with God after the two angels go ahead. God says he's going down, but the angels go ahead of him. He talks to Abraham. He tells Abraham what he's about to do. Abraham asks if he's going to destroy it if there's 50 righteous, and he keeps going. And God tells him he wouldn't do it if there's 50 righteous, and so on. You know the account. Well, then when you get into Genesis 19, you learn about what happened when the angels got there. And then eventually in the account, God arrives on the scene. Remember, he said, I'm going down into Sodom to judge it for the outcry that has come up to heaven. The angels do go ahead of him, but the anticipation is that God is coming. They're there to get Lot out of the city. Well, in Genesis 19:24, it says, then the Lord, remember he's on earth, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah fire and brimstone from the Lord out of heaven. So even if you don't know the Lord is on earth, there's an issue there. The Lord rained from the Lord. And in the Hebrew text, it's very interesting. It's there's a direct object marker before the second occurrence of the Lord. You have a very clear subject-object distinction. One person called the Lord rained fire and brimstone from another person called the Lord. And the word for Lord there is the covenant name of God, Jehovah, or Jehovah, as we say in English. So you have one person called Lord who appeared in the form of a man on earth, raining down fire from another person called Lord who's in heaven. Think about that. One who appears in the form of a man who's doing something from the other who remains unseen in heaven. Sound at all familiar to you? Sound like something you could believe as a Christian? Of course. And even more, remember what Jesus said was going to happen on the final day? On the final day, we know, of course, that the Lord Jesus is going to come from heaven with blazing fire, right? He's going to consume the enemies of God, it says. But what is he like in that day, too? He says that, the coming of the Son of Man, right? It's going to be just like what happened on Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah, just like, right? He's associating the judgment that he's going to bring with the judgment that was brought in the past, which was a judgment brought by a person named Jehovah in human form. That's remarkable. Clearly, the Old Testament and the New Testament are consistent. The Qur'an is the odd man out. And so we don't have to be on our back heels as we talk to Muslims. We have everything we need to demonstrate the consistency of our claim and the inconsistency of theirs.
Thank you. Now our famous sister, Hatun.
I believe that was one of the longest 30 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Actually, he really did a good job.
Great
job,
man. A couple of 30 minutes.
This is about to be the longest 30 minutes of my life.
One of the things I'm going to do is once I go back, I will go check how many minutes and seconds Anthony spoke. Okay, I am talking about. What was my full title?
Your
I know
topic.
the title, I don't know the full title.
Okay. Hatun, the way to Islamic paradise and what is waiting.
Okay, so we are going to talk about how to get to paradise. But before I talk about it, can someone help me? How do we get to Christian paradise?
By accepting Jesus as our Lord and Savior.
Okay, by accepting Jesus as our Lord and Savior. Anything else?
And then dying. And then dying.
And dying his death. Anything else?
Praise God.
Grace of God.
Repentance for sin.
The blood of Jesus cleanses us.
I didn't hear the last one.
The blood of Jesus cleanses us.
Blood of Jesus cleansed us. That's how we get to paradise, correct? Okay. Make sure you remember your answers at the end because I'm not happy with your answers, and that's fine. It's amazing that Islamic hell is very scary. Okay. But before you get to hell, you need to kind of go through certain things. So, anyone remembers what happens when you die if you are Muslim, from Islamic perspective?
Don't you go to hell?
Not that moment. So you got like some time to spend
You
before
stay-
you get to hell.
In the grave, where you're gonna go through a lot of suffering in the grave, based on how you use the bathroom and how you are uncareful of being clean and all that stuff.
Okay, so it is very difficult to get the Islamic hell, even Islamic paradise. It's very difficult. So before you make your way to, remember, before you make your way to hell or Islamic heaven, you need to kind of spend some time in graveyard, in grave. You've got angels who are going to torture you, and even the animals are going to hear scream of your words. And as it's been expressed, reason for you to be in that punishment is because the way you urinated. Okay? There are certain rules, of course, how to do those things. I'm not going to go through that because you are eating. If anyone wants to figure out, just let me know. I'll give you my PowerPoint. So there is it's this long time and very bad punishment, okay? Like people are screaming, everyone is screaming for help, and then you've got angel is hammering you again and again and again. And the day of judgment comes, Allah already planned and programmed who is going to do what and who's going to end up where. So you stand in front of Allah. At that stage, Allah can make his decision to send you to hell or to heaven. And you get to hell or you get to heaven. But before you do that, since there is a very big punishment in graveyard and there's very big punishment in hell, ideally you want to do your best to make your way to Islamic paradise. Anyone remembers who can skip the grave punishment as well as hell punishment to get the Islamic paradise? Martyrs. What are they? What are they?
Who killed in jihad?
My left ear is dead.
People killed practicing jihad.
So jihad is like just a struggle.
So
Okay,
tell me.
people who kill in the name of Allah or get killed in the name of Allah. Okay? So because this great punishment is awful, hell is awful, therefore we are not surprised that there are individuals who wants to kill in the name of Allah and get killed in the name of Allah. So they will get to Islamic paradise. Surah 9 talks about every Muslim is going to end up in hell in one point. Only who is going to skip that is the ones who kill in the name of Allah and get killed in the name of Allah. So when you look at the Islamic teachings, what happens in grave as well as what happens in hell, it shouldn't surprise us that there are individuals who want to kill and get killed in the name of Allah. And of course, that doesn't only give them free access to Islamic paradise and get rid of, they are spared from the grave, but it also helps them to intercede 70 of their relatives. Intercede for 70 of their relatives. I don't know if you had this in the state, but when ISIS was actively kind of conquering the lands and raping people and then killing people and destroying the archaeology, lots of women from Britain went to become wife for those jihadis. In the intention, let's hope my husband is dead, he killed in the name of Allah or got killed in the name of Allah, so he makes his way to paradise and he can intercede for me, because he will remember me, I am pleasing him, he will intercede for me and I will make my way to Islamic paradise by skipping graveyard as well as hell. So it's very attractive, okay, so far. You can do anything you want to do. If you want to make your way to Islamic paradise, you just like say the magical words and take the life of other individuals. Surah 9 verse 111 and onwards, as well as Surah 9 71 to 72 talks about it. Everyone is in hell. And Muhammad expresses that he promised paradise to those who give him what is between their legs as well as what is between their jaw. Okay? And so far it's all good. There is something like we need to give our attention. motivations for jihadis to be men. Okay, you don't want to be like woman jihadis. Can anyone guess what might be the reason?
Yeah, because the men are the ones who are gonna get the 72 virgins, so what's the women gonna get?
Okay, so you don't want women to get 72 virgins.
No.
That's very sexist. In this feminist world, that's very sexist. Anything else? Muhammad has this vision. He looks down and then he sees majority of women in hell. Why?
Division of intellect
So they are deficient in their intelligence and
religion.
they are ungrateful to their husband. It's very ungrateful to their husband. You've got to be grateful to your husband. He does very hard job. So he says majority of women in hell because woman bleeds once a month. So that makes her to not able to pray and fast. As well as I said, we are all know, like from our experiences, we are very, very ungrateful to our husbands. They work very, very hard and it's always difficult for them to simply look after many wives. It's hard work. Okay, so you get to Islamic paradise. What happens in Islamic paradise? Actually, no, before you get to Islamic paradise, those jihadis who killed in the name of Allah make their way to Islamic paradise. Rest of the Muslims are in hell. And then, of course, it's not going to come nice because you are eating your food, but as a Christians, you are going to be in hell too. And you are going to be there like for very, very long, forever time. Okay? And Muslims are all going to get out of the hell. Anyone knows how that works?
Allah's gonna take the saints of the Muslim and put it in a Christian and a Jew.
Yeah, so Allah has this amazing generosity.
Very generous gift.
Allah has very amazing generosity and kindness towards Muslim people. Allah is going to pass their sin on Christians and Jews so that they can make their way to Islamic paradise. So when you hear that when you witness that your Muslim friend kind of sinned, just beware, according to Islam, for a long time, you are going to be punished for their sin. That's very kind, like Allah is just so kind. Yes, sister.
Isn't that substitution?
It can be lots of things. I wouldn't call that. I would simply say, well, Allah can't do much if Allah loves Muslims more than Christians. So, yes, Allah simply gives the sin. So, remember, the reason you are in hell, you are a sinner. You committed shirk and you are in hell. So, as a sinner, you are taking the sin, Allah is giving the sins of others to you. Yes, sister?
Doesn't that prove the point that there is payment for sin?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they'll say they're
But the problem is the Quran says no one carrying a sin that can pay someone else sin.
Yeah, but you are in hell. Do you think Allah is going to say like, oh, how do you feel, George? I'm going to give that sin to you. Do you want to make a bargain? Allah doesn't care about you. Well, you already lost from your belief as well as you lost from your gender. According to Islamic tradition, Allah can show certain kindness towards Christians and Jews, those who are going to be in hell. Christian woman and Jew woman. So it's been expressed that Muslim man is going to get virgins in Islamic paradise. Well, I don't want you to imagine because it's like very disturbing image, but they are very beautiful virgins. So Allah, I'm not going to give the descriptions. If you really don't know, come and ask me later. So Allah is going to show kindness to Christian woman and Jewish woman and then offer them place in Islamic paradise to become virgins for those Muslim men. So jihadis are going to get huris. Some of those might come from hell, from Jewish and Christians. So idea that Muslim Islam teaches is like, because hell is like really, really bad place. Too much punishment, very painful. So what Allah is doing is Allah is rescuing Christians and then offering Christian woman. Oh, and there is no gender change in hell. And there is no ice cream in hell. Like seriously, like it's like there is not even sun cream in hell. So Allah is gonna offer you kindness to the Christian woman and then say, come to Islamic paradise and become one of those wives for the jihadi Muslims. Yes, sir.
I thought it was maybe the Houris. I thought it was actually 72 grapes.
Well, depends how you read it, but for the since I'm talking about Islamic paradise, I think I'll go with the Houris. Because description is given is talking about tradition, from the tradition, talking about how their breast looks like, how certain things looks like. Therefore, I'm just gonna go with the Huri interpretation because right now it's with my agenda. So it's on the topic of grapes. Muslims cannot have wine in this world. It was allowed and then it became non-allowed. And it's going to become allowed in Islamic paradise. So when you see Muslim missionaries are eating grapes on live streams and making fun of certain things, they are simply just like, yeah, those are the grapes are going to be served to us in Islamic paradise. They're just making fun of them. I think that should little bit concern us in a sense. The things are forbidden in this world, which identified by Allah as sin, becomes reward. Allah in the Quran says you can get up to 4 wives. And then out of His kindness, Allah offers them 72. It talks about in Islamic tradition, you will have like 70,000, in paradise there will be 70,000 doors, and in each door you will have wives. And those wives are not going to see one another so that there is no jealousy or anything. Like Allah kind of provides all those kind of things. Yet, in this world, Allah says 4 wives. In Islamic paradise, it becomes more. So, human desire, sinful human desire is being met and rewarded in Islamic paradise. While that happens, so of course you would expect Allah to be in Islamic paradise as well, because you meet with Muslims, pray 5 times a day, they fast, and then you kind of say, yeah, those are very devoted Muslims, I am sure they will spend eternity with Allah in Islamic paradise. Does anyone know how kind of they can see Allah in Islamic paradise? Allah is not there? No. Why not? It's above that. Allah can't even enter paradise? Is that because Allah doesn't like the business of Las Vegas?
He's very limited.
How do people get to see Allah in Islamic paradise?
Raised to him. My inference would they would have to be raised to him like a certain individual was.
I'm looking for another answer.
Is there something about from behind the veil? Or is that, am I thinking of something different?
Allah will be behind the veil, that's a different story. And then while Allah is behind the veil, Allah says to Muhammad, Abu Bakr is with Allah behind the veil. Allah says to Muhammad, come close. And that's at the middle of the night. You can imagine what is the interpretation of that. But I'm asking for different thing. Don't you think it's strange that you spend all your time to worship Allah, and when you die, the place you are going to spend your eternity, Allah is not present there. But there will be circles where that circle is where you kind of get to remember Allah. Yes, there are circles where Allah will be remembered in Islamic paradise. That should concern us. Abu Bakr, father-in-law of Muhammad, first caliph, expresses he wouldn't feel safe from the deception of Allah even if his one foot is in paradise. So it's like, it's very difficult to get there. It's very difficult to get there. And when you get there, life is really, really hard. Imagine like all those virgins and then they become virgins again and again and again. Life is very hard. It's not only you got those virgins and then you've got those beautiful, immortal boys. They are going to serve you. And according to Islamic tradition, after they serve you, they are not going to believe. I want to say imagine that, but don't imagine that it's like ugly. Okay? And of course, since Islamic paradise is very similar to Las Vegas, I've never been to Las Vegas, I seen on movies, there will be marketplace. So you turn up the market, you imagine things, and then you can simply get them. Couple of things needs our attention. While Allah passed the sins of Muslims, puts them on Jews and Christians, and then take Muslims to Islamic paradise, description of Islamic paradise is very physical. Physical delights, physical food, physical shade, and all physical those virgins. Yet, Allah is not there, Allah is not dwelling with His people. While Islam encourages in this word slavery, there is a slaves in Islamic paradise forever, as well as all those other carnal things. As I said, I'm not going to go through those description of Huris, but just like they are very disturbing. Also, they are not disturbing. They can be very attractive. So if you want to sell Islam, all you do is you offer them that free Las Vegas. And a lot of people will buy it. I was recently in a court hearing this gentleman who converted to Islam only a couple of years ago. And he's got very bad background. Before he became a Muslim, he was stealing things, he was like into like very nasty things. He became Muslim and first thing he's planning is to kill me so that he can make his way to Islamic paradise. Why? Because this punishment in the grave is awful. The image of hell is awful. Therefore, you need to find your quickest way to get Islamic paradise. And as you get there, out of kindness, of course, you take some of your relatives. I want to bring something to our attention. So I did ask, how do you get to Islamic paradise? Sorry, I did ask, how do you get to biblical heaven? And then I heard some answers. I am afraid to tell you, I was actually reminded yesterday, there is nothing we can do to get to biblical heaven. There's nothing. Why? Because Lord Jesus Christ He's done everything. You cannot do anything to make your way to biblical heaven. You do your Christian duties, you have your Christian disciplines. For what? Because you love Jesus, therefore you want to spend time with Him, you meditate on the scripture, you read your scripture. Some of people haven't read their scripture today, but those of you who did that today,
I have already passed from death into life.
how?
Because the one who knew no sin became sin for me.
Because of
That I
what
might be
Jesus
the
did.
righteousness of God.
Yeah, because
So
of the
then
Jesus.
everything flows from who I am now. And it's
Okay.
with Jesus.
So when you die as a Christian, what is going to happen to you? Are you going to go to this like kind of little kind version of grave punishment, and then get into Islamic part, biblical part of heaven, what's going to happen to you?
Go to the presence of the Lord.
You are going to be in the presence of the Lord. Are you sure?
Yes.
How can you be sure?
Because I have righteousness.
Of Lord Jesus Christ. Okay. And what is waiting for you in heaven? It's not Las Vegas, and it's not like Netherlands as well. So what is it waiting for you?
Jesus.
Jesus is waiting. What about other earthly things?
Saints who have gone before you, like other Christians who passed away.
So you will be probably standing next to Amos, and then like, let's hope that he doesn't ask you like, oh, do you remember what I wrote about? What else is waiting for you in heaven?
The best of the earthly things will be like nothing on the ground.
Anything
Like the
else?
Streets.
Anything else? Eternal life. Anything else?
Presence of God.
So I asked a similar question in one of the Muslim Bible studies, and answers I was hearing is, I'm comparing them with the answers you are giving me now, is the description of those Houris. So Muslims were describing their age and their body shape. And then waiting those boys to serve them. So I'm finding it's interesting that today in this room, you are not focusing such a physical things in heaven. Why? Because in this world, we are fallen in love with Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, we want to see him and we want to spend our eternity with him, not with the things he's offering to us. Our heaven is not about, oh, how big your house is going to be, or how many grapes you are going to get. It's about whom you are going to meet and spend your eternity with. Okay? So I need volunteers who has good English. Even though I was told my English was very good, I need volunteers to read some stuff for me. Is it a question or you want to be volunteer?
No, I'm a volunteer.
Okay.
Have to be loud.
I can do that.
Can I get your attention to Revelation chapter 21, verse 3 to 4? And as you listen it, please remember the description of Islamic paradise is given to Muslims.
And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away.
Amen. Thank you very much. Can I have another beloved of Christ to read for me Revelation chapter 22, verse 3 to 6?
And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. They shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. There shall be no night there. They need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. He said unto me, These sayings are faithful and true, and the Lord God of the holy prophets sent his angel to show unto his servants the things which must shortly be done.
See the differences? It's all about our triune God. It's all about him. Why? Because in this world, we are fixing our hearts and our minds to him. Therefore, our desire is for him, and we will be spending eternity with him. We will be worshipping, we will be praying, but above all, we are continue to have our perfect relationship with him. And he's like so awesome, so glorious, there won't even need of light. Because he's covering everything up. Okay? So that's the alternative I think we can offer to Mr. or Mrs. Muslims. I've got 3 minutes, 40 seconds. If there's any questions, I can answer them. Yes, sir.
I did wonder a little bit ago when you were describing the reward apparently for those who kill in the name of Allah or are killed in jihad. I think I know this, but I interact with a lot of Muslim students on the campuses. How many of